Welcome back. You here with Goldberg. Today I'll be talking about living in El Salvador, which has been requested a couple of times. And I figured there'd be a benefit whether you're looking at geomax or find more affordable waters elsewhere. Although in this case, it's something of a landmass. But it does border the Pacific Ocean. The tides are going to be on the rougher side. At the same time, if you like surfing, it's a good spot. So keep that in the back of your head. A little bit of history with El Salvador. In the 1980s, you had an immensely bloody civil war that was sponsored by the US on the one side and the Soviet Union. That caused devastation of the agricultural industry, which resulted in many people fleeing north to the United States, some of which started these gangs, such as 18th Street MS-13. They were deported, and when they came back, they're not cartels. There is actually not a huge drug problem in El Salvador, but it was basically the mafia, protection money. And in the power vacuum in the 90s, as the Civil War wound it down, the fact you had these very corrupt elites that weren't interested in taking care of the people, the gangs became immensely powerful. However, that was not all over the place. There were still pockets that were relatively safe. More recently, things have changed for the better on a broader scale. And so that will be our next topic here. When most Americans hear El Salvador, assuming they even know what that is, they're saying, oh, you're going to be killed the moment you step off the plane. Maybe if you're a moronic burger cell who doesn't know how to take care of yourself and it goes around more constitution, assuming that you can just have safety guaranteed. But I would say most American cities, large cities, are less safe than this country, at least in the primary metropolitan areas. Because you have to remember, they've been under martial law for at least the last 2 years. And that means the government can just go into your house and disappear you. And on this, Constitution, well, I'm historically butthurt, none of that stuff applies. You and the people, as a result, tend to be extraordinarily polite. They're either going to help you or they're going to ignore you. But there's not going to be that passive aggressive thing you see in the United States, like I'm going to try to start something. You won't come across that in El Salvador unless maybe you go off really into a remote area where there's not much government jurisdiction, or really not jurisdiction, but presence. You have, in most decent sized businesses, an armed guard with at least a revolver or a shotgun. You have municipal police. You have national police, and those are the ones you don't want to mess with because they can ruin your life. And you have the military that provides security. People have come to know that if they commit petty crimes, even if they rob someone, I mean, especially if they rob a foreigner, there's a high likelihood they're going to be accused of gang membership, which can mean either they get killed or they have mandatory minimum long sentence in a prison, which there means essentially you're going to die. So all the stuff we saw, smash and grab, the last couple of years in the United States, that would not happen in this country. Like once more, I have to emphasize extremely polite, helpful people. If you speak a little bit of Spanish, they're going to not have a problem assisting you. It's not like Francophone nations where they'll just be very arrogant and shoved up their own fried frog legs, or what do you want to call it. One thing that does help with this, however, is trying to blend in. In fact, people told me this, you look like a local, and you're like, well, yeah, but you're tall. In San Salvador, you will see guys who are 5'8", 5'9", even a couple of dudes who are 6'3", 6'4", taller than myself. But the way you dress matters. If you want to go there flashing a bunch of bling, just generally not a good idea. Although if you stay in the touristy areas, you'll be fine. But even out amongst the common people, there's a very different culture and atmosphere. And what I found too is that with taxi drivers, they tend to be on the honest side. It's not like Dominican Republic where they'll try to play stupid and rip you off. We'll get a little bit more into that when it comes to transportation in a second here. But if you're looking for housing in a not so great area, like as far as income is concerned, you could probably get a full-sized house, 250, 300 bucks a month rent, a bit more, a bit less, depending on what it has. If you're talking about in a nice area like La Zona Rosa, the touristy section, you're probably 700 to 800, depending on what you're shooting for. Food is immensely affordable. You can get fresh fruit and vegetables, obviously tortillas, pupusas, almost anywhere you go, on the side of the road if you choose. If you go to the supermarkets that the locals shop at, it's incredibly reasonable. You're not going to have a problem there. One thing that should be pointed out, however, when it comes to appliances, And not all these houses have AC. Some of them only possess fans. So if you're going to live there for a long time and you want those creature comforts, just understand there's going to be probably some kind of upcharge because much of it's imported. So I saw, for instance, a PS5, maybe not an absolute necessity, but that was $1,000. There were appliances that on Amazon you get cheaper in the US, much more expensive. So that type of stuff is going to be certainly on the elevated side. But if it's just basic aspects of existence, not too bad. Even restaurants that are in the touristy areas are not super pricey when compared to the US. So fast food, you can get a full meal, it's like $6. And by the way, they do use American dollars. They adopted this some years ago alongside Bitcoin. Much more reasonable. And a lot of the transactions people prefer cash, although that's changing as well. They're becoming more comfortable with cards and even to some degree Bitcoin. In terms of transportation, you have a couple of different options, but Uber is going to be your best bet. It's the most secure and difficult for people to try to jack you over in terms of the price. Now, you probably heard those stories online. Oh, they only take cash. That's not really true, especially in San Salvador proper. They got no issue with cards, at least from what I came across. Now, if you go out further on some kind of excursion by yourself, you may have to pay a little bit of extra cash to get back because fuel costs are expensive and they don't have a means necessarily of getting another ride to cover the cost if they're returning. But that's just, we all come across that. I mean, I've done Uber Eats in the United States delivering, and it's just nonsense because of precisely how they operate. They try to give you something out in the country for a couple dollars. You can't take anything on the way back, so you're just losing money based upon how much gas you're spending. Besides Uber, you've got yellow flag cabs, which are okay. You can try utilizing public transportation, which is not very good. They're these old school buses, which don't have AC. And especially if you ride them towards the end of the day when everyone's coming home from work, this is a tropical country, it's going to be kind of odorous. There are the chicken trucks, little ones with the metal cages that many people use to get around. I never tried one of those. And you could consider buying a vehicle which is going to run you like, I think, 10 to 12 grand for a basic compact car that is stick shift, by the way. Now, the problem with that is there's no financing in this country, or if there is, you're going to pay a lot of interest. So you're probably going to have to pay out of pocket. And even there, the traffic patterns are very disorganized. There's no like wait your turn, follow the signal. You just got to fight to get your spot. So for some folks, that's not really advisable. I would just say be in a location where you can walk for groceries or use Uber, maybe the bus if you absolutely have to. So now some people are going to ask, what about the Chicas down there? Any nation that was part of the former Central American Republic is going to have genetics that are overwhelmingly Mayan and then Spaniard with some Arab cell and Asian mixed in, although not too substantial. So as a result, the vast majority of the women are going to be something of a mestiza, maybe looking more indigenous or a little bit less so in the middle. There are pockets of whites in some parts of the country, and especially in the rich districts. I saw maybe 3 chicks that were real stunners. But to access those, unless you're Chad, you're going to need to definitely have a stronger command of the language, be living there, and plugged into some kind of social circle. That being said, the regular women you meet are extremely polite. They're very friendly. They don't have an issue going out. And some will say, oh, yeah, well, that's just because of beta bucks or it's just because of JBW. It really doesn't matter. Like, all the concern trolling is meaningless as long as you know what you're doing and you're not developing too much on the simp emotion side. But with that being noted, you go out on a date, it is old school, so the expectation is you're going to pay. But that's not all that bad because a local area like that kind of venue, you might spend 15 bucks. If you go to a touristy area, that including if you pay for her Uber, which is not very expensive, $25, $30. But these are women who are usually going to be a lot more affectionate, a lot more down to do stuff, not feral pig Americans that just have contempt for the vast majority of men. So in that sense, you can live as a regular guy. You can go on a date and be yourself, not be cuck dancing the whole time. So that's definitely a positive. Whatever you want to make of it, well, it's because they don't have the same resources. Well, it's because it really is immaterial because it's like Whether a Western guy is exploiting a woman in another country or an American woman is exploiting a simp in the United States, it really doesn't, it's one or the other. So which is worse? That's the question you will have to answer. On that note, did I see many passport bros there? No. There was one dude I saw at the beach area, but I think he was a surfer. And another that was part of, actually on my flight, I think, on the way back, he looked like a passport bro because he was wearing foam posits. I was like, why would you wear that in El Salvador? It's probably just making yourself a target. But this doesn't seem to be much on the radar. In fact, it's interesting. In the early 1900s, there was an official or unofficial policy by the Salvadoran government, whichever you please, where they said no brothers allowed. You can have Arab cells, some Asians, but no brothers. And so consequently, there's not a very large Afro population here. I'm sure that will change as some of the passport bros start pushing it. Now, I did meet a guy who lives pretty close to where I do in the US, a Hispanic dude, very cool. And he said, oh, you got to go to Medellin. You're going to be treated like a god there. Now, I have heard that Medellin is oversaturated at this point, but I wonder if it's certain people, because sometimes that happens. Or sometimes it's people who just don't know how to kind of blend in, do as the Romans do. And so they get ripped off, they get targeted because they're just a dumbass. Whereas if you're chill, you understand the culture, you speak some of the language, less likely that it's going to occur. So we'll see. But yeah, that was my first excursion into Central America, and I enjoyed it. I'll probably try out some of the other countries. The flights are not very long, and they're pretty affordable. If you can just go for a few days and not take an additional luggage, like just your personal item, fit everything in there, you can probably get the whole thing for maybe like 300 bucks around there, depending on which airport you're flying from. So, yeah, definitely something to consider. Your biggest risks moving to El Salvador would be if there's macro, like global economic problems that affect them, and then people start losing their jobs, violence flares up, or you have some soy democracy, color revolution that removes the government and puts in place a more pliant regime that allows the Salvadoran people to be oppressed and murdered for the benefits of rich corporations. So that's the biggest problem. Nothing's perfect just because you have a certain government. It depends if that government can stay and if future governments honor what they were doing.